Hello, and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm going to sculpt a Hollow Knight figurine out of polymer clay, based on the indie video game Hollow Knight. So I have my reference material and supplies ready to go, but before I get started, I wanted to give a shout out to StickyArt Channel. He does some amazing art tutorials and tips videos, and one of the things he does when he does polymer clay sculptures is he does a sketch first, and then he uses that sketch as a reference to get his proportions right. So instead of doing a sketch, I just printed one of my reference pictures of the knight from Hollow Knight to be the size I want to do the figurine and use that as a reference instead. So if you are into different art videos, which I'm assuming you are since you're here, be sure to check out StickyArt Channel and tell them Andrew's Clay Creations and More sent you. All right, on to the sculpture. So to start things off, I am doing a base for the knight to stand on, and I'm using this burnt umber. It comes in this multi-pack of clay as kind of my base for the dirt. And then I'll sculpt some rocks to go on top of that. So once I get it conditioned out, I'm going to just kind of do a circular base. And so I just kind of traced around a bottle to use as a base reference. And then I use this little multi-prong tool to add some texture to it. And then I'll go ahead and start mixing up the colors for the different rocks. And then I just want to make sure that he's going to stand okay, so I just use the little reference picture for that. And how I like to do a lot of the rocks is I take gray granite clay. It's a Primo Sculpey color, so it has little specks in it, kind of give it that, concrete look. And I'll mix that with some different shades or colors, depending on what I want to do. So for this, I just did different grayscale rocks, and so I mixed some white and some black with it. And so I just got to start on those. Just so I can have something to work with, and then we'll set that aside. And then I'm going to do kind of a wire, not really a skeleton, but kind of a form for the Hollow Knight, or for the knight. And that way I've got a support for the clay. Normally on a sculpture this small, I wouldn't make a little armature for it, but because I wanted to have his arm sticking out and have that sword there, I figured I'm going to need a little more support than normal. And so I used kind of thicker wire for the main pieces, and then I took some craft wire and wrapped it around there to hold it together. And then I just built it up a little bit with some foil. The character in the game doesn't appear to be terribly thick, but I still wanted to use a little bit of foil to kind of bulk that up, and that way I wasn't using so much clay. And then once I have the foil covered over the wires, I went ahead and covered the entire sculpture with black clay. The knight's body is black in the game, and then he has a cape, or what appears to be a cape. I haven't gotten too far in the game yet. I played it for a few hours, but I'm not for sure what that is that he's wearing. And then, obviously the helmet or the little, whatever his head is made out of. I've heard it's kind of like a shell or something, but I'm not positive. So I'm just finishing up the body here, adding the arms and legs. And you'll see on his left arm, I have that wire sticking out farther, and that's to attach the sword once it's done. And I'll kind of smooth those out with the ball tool and get his other leg on there. And before I slide those on, lots of times I'll not drill, but pre-poke a hole through that clay. And that way when I slide it onto the wire, it'll follow the hole I did, and it won't, come out in an area I don't want it to. And then once I have that finished up, I kind of bent the wires in so they weren't sticking out too far, and then matched it up against the artwork I was using. And it seems to be pretty close to the size I want it to be. Like I said, I'm not worried about having it perfect, but if I can get close to the proportions, that's what I'm going for with it. Now I just poke the body through the base and then bend those wires over and then kind of push those down a little bit and then just check it against the artwork again to make sure it looks okay. So since that seems to work all right, I'm going to go ahead and make a second base out of black clay and put it underneath to cover up those wires so they're not showing through on the underside of it. Now originally this is all I was going to do, but then once I had that done, I wasn't happy with the finish between the two different colors of clay, and so I decided to go ahead and make some more rocks and build those up around the edge of it, and I think this gave it a lot better finished look to it. In an earlier video, I did a time-lapse of a fairy door wall hanging. So I did a wooden door with rocks around the outside of it, and this is the same technique as I did for that door. And it works out really well. Now for the rocks that actually go around the outside of it, I wanted them to kind of blend together to kind of frame it. So I did try to make them around the same size. I didn't obviously want them to be exactly the same size, but they do have a similar size and shape, different from the rocks that are actually on the base. And then I went ahead and did a few smaller rocks to kind of fill in the gaps. And I just think that has a more visually appealing look than just having those rocks there. And I kind of mixed them up with the different shades of rocks. Now that the base is done, I went ahead and used the plastic knife tool to kind of just adjust the shape of the body a little bit before making the sword. And for the sword for the knight, I'm mixing white clay with silver, and it's actually referred to as his nail. They're all kind of like in a bug world, so I think a nail would be equivalent to a sword for them. And it doesn't look like a nail, and it's not metallic in the game because of the art style, but I thought it would be fine to mix some silver and white together, and that would give me the look I wanted for it. The issue I ran into while doing this is sometimes when you mix colors together, or certain colors of Primo Sculpey are softer than others, and so what happened is I mixed this clay together and it was really soft, kind of mushy. And so when I would slide it on the wire, it would distort my sculpture. So I would, kept adjusting it, and I just wasn't happy with it. So what I decided to do was go ahead and sculpt it by itself, and then, add the details to it and add the handle. And once I had that all done, I ran the wire or the needle tool in there and just made a spot for that wire to slide into when it was done. So I decided to go ahead and do these as two separate pieces, and then I could just attach it to the sculpture when I was done. Alright, so we have this done. We're going to go ahead and bake it, and remember, always bake according to package instructions. And the reason why I'm baking is so that way this stuff is nice and firm, or solid, and I don't have to worry about messing this sculpture up when I add the cape and the head to it. Now the last thing I'm doing with the knife here, or with his sword, is taking the X-Acto knife and trimming it down a little bit to kind of give it an edge, and that way it's not completely flat on the back. I used some liquid clay to attach the sword onto the wire and then up against his left, where his left hand would be, and that would help to hold it in place. And then for his cape, I mixed Primo Sculpey Ultramarine Blue and Cobalt Blue together, so that way, it wasn't just a solid blue color. And then once I had that mixed and softened, I went ahead and made a bunch of little pieces, almost like feathers. Looking at the artwork, especially the one that's closest to my hand there, his cape looks like it's multiple layers and almost like feathers laying over each other. So I went with that same look for my figurine, and so I made a bunch of these. I got them shaped out, and then I decided I want to make sure that they look like they're flowing in that picture I'm using for my reference. So to keep these up while it's baking, I wrap my entire sculpture with foil, and then I use some of the liquid clay to kind of attach them around the neck area, and then just added these on in layers. So I do this for several of these, and it really worked out well. Now this is one of those things, whenever I'm doing art, I always don't know when to stop. when adding like scales to a dragon or bumps on a monster or something like that. And so with this cape, I really wasn't sure how much I wanted to add because I wanted it to be very full, but I wasn't for sure how it was going to turn out or look if I have too much there. The artwork seems to vary on how full and thick this cape or cloak is. And so I just kind of, did quite a few pieces and just kind of stopped when I was somewhat satisfied with the look of it and hoping that, once he was all done and I pulled the foil off, I was happy with the results. Then the last thing I did is for the cape is I went in and added kind of a crease line. I just wanted to add a little more detail to it. And so then after the cape was done, I went ahead and rolled up a foil ball in about the shape of the head of the knight. He's got a very marshmallow shape to his head, so where it's kind of a cylinder but a little bit rounded edges. And instead of white, I used pearl. There's a couple reasons for that. One, I think the pearl clay looks really good and I like the shiny to it, but for some reason pearl clay doesn't pick up as much stuff as the white clay. It has kind of a finish to it that almost is resistant to that, where white clay will pick up every speck. And to be honest with you, just, it's very frustrating to work with, and you can clean it up, but to me, it's almost worth it just to use the Primo pearl clay instead of the white. And so right now, I'm just using a ball tool to kind of shape out the eyes to match up with the knight figurine. And then I'll go ahead and make his little horns. Now, because of the shape of the horns, I didn't want them drooping in the oven. So I went ahead and got them shaped out. And then I used some wire to kind of hold their form. And so I went ahead and tried to make them as close to symmetrical as possible. And it's, pretty much impossible to do that by hand. But for me, I wanted to get them at least as close as I could, having them match each other. And then I just went ahead and pre-poke some holes with the needle tool and then attach those to the knight's helmet or head. And then I went ahead and added the little notches to the top of each one of the horns. Now this second horn I had a little more issues with only because I wanted it to match the first horn. So I had to kind of keep adjusting it to use the first one as a reference so it had the same angle and shape and thickness. So once that was done and I added the notch to it, then I was pretty happy with how the horns looked on the helmet. And so then I just went ahead and shaped out the eyes just a little bit more, and I would start working on doing the black in the middle. So what I try to do is I just kind of soften up my black, and then I just take two sizes about the same size, so that way the eyes will be about the same size, and then use the ball tool to kind of push those in. Again, with it being kind of a 2D art style in the game, you can't really tell, I'm assuming that those are openings in the eyes and it's just dark in there. So that's what I did for the eyes to get them to kind of look indented and almost you're looking in instead of having it sit on top of the pearl clay. All right, so now that he's done, we'll go ahead and bake him one more time according to package instructions. Here is the finished knight figurine from Hollow Knight. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you have ideas for other video game characters you want me to make, please leave them in the comments down below. I know I've had a request to do something from Fortnite. I haven't played Fortnite, so I'm not really too familiar with it. So if there's something certain, specific you want me to make, mention that in the comments and I'll look it up and see if that's something that interests me. I know my daughter mentioned to do something from Overwatch. I have played a little bit of Overwatch, so that's a possibility. Otherwise, there's some other games I want to try to make some characters from. I played a lot of Dead Cells last year and really liked that, so that's a possibility. Well, thank you again for watching today's video, and remember, never stop creating. Bye. You can purchase items with my mascot on it from my TeePublic Store. And you can purchase my one-eyed blobs from my Etsy shop. Links to my TeePublic Store, my Etsy shop, my Facebook page, and my Instagram page are in the description box below.